Who knows about the Tower of Babel? Well, we're going to look at it and see what relevance it has for today. I'm just standing over here so you can see the screen, because I'll chuck a couple of photos of it in a bit. Okay, but let's read the account of the Tower of Babel. But before we just get into that, if I say to you Tower of Babel, what are some of the images that come up in your mind?
A spiral.
A spiral type building, yep.
People trying to build it.
Yeah, how big was it?
Big,
Huge?
all the way to the sky so they can get up there.
Right, that's the one I had too as a kid. Yep. That it was like up into the clouds. Anything else? So we're going to see what the reality was. Okay. So verse 1. Now the whole earth was one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed east, because here's the background. The background is they come out of the ark. These were Noah's descendants, and they'd spread out from Turkey, which is mountains of Ararat. That's where the ark landed and can be seen, the outline of it today. And then they came down and went east to a flat plain. To the area they're talking about is about 90 k's less south of Baghdad today, Iraq. Okay, to the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks." Now there is a reason for making bricks. It's flat. There's not a lot of stone around, but plenty of mud. So plenty of things to make bricks with. And bake them thoroughly. They had bricks for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." What was God's decree to do in Genesis 1? Be fruitful and multiply and
Go out.
and fill the whole earth. And he says the same thing to Noah in the preceding chapters. When they come out of there, be fruitful. He repeats it. Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the whole earth. Then these guys come along and said, "Hey, let's group together. Don't worry what God said. And we will make a tower. We'll make a name for ourselves." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, and so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore the name is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So Babel means confusion. Okay, now the precede to this, if you want to read in the chapter before, which we're not going to do because it's like such and such came from this person, such and such came from that person, and then you can see where some of the names go to different parts of the world. So the Magog was one of the descendants of Noah, and they end up going all to Russia. Cush end up going to Africa, and there's all these maps of where all these people groups end up going and can be traced back to this very thing. But the real reason that the Lord scattered them was they were trying to do something, that they were trying to make the heavens, touch the heavens and say, oh, look, we want to control part of this whole thing. So what the preceding chapter, there's a guy called Nimrod. Now, there's a strange name, but Nimrod. And it says in chapter 10 that he was a renowned hunter. And it says he was a hunter before the Lord. That's what you'll read in Scripture. If you read it in Hebrew, it says it's slightly different and the meaning's different. You know, sometimes we lose a little bit of meaning. We have to check it. So if I said to you, Paul's face is before me, sounds all right? He's right there. But if I said Paul was in my face, what would that mean?
You really up your feet.
It says like an offense. That's actually how Nimrod is actually written in Hebrew, that Nimrod, he was in God's face by the way he acted. And he was one of the main people that gathered all these people together to do what God said not to do. Group and then make this temple. So here are the realities of the temple. The temple, the tower, here's a depiction. I'm going to show you what it actually looks like. This is what it's called a ziggurat. And a ziggurat was this whole thing right here, and up there is where the god that they worshipped lived. And the priests would go up this thing and they would serve, and it's got all this meaning and stuff. Now, the ziggurat that we know today is this one, and this is found south of Babylon, and it is a smaller version of what they built. It's missing its top. It's had a lot of restoration work, but it's still there. On this one, they worship the sun god Nan. On the other one that we're going to talk about today, the Tower of Babel, they worshipped Marduk, something like that, who's supposed to conquer all these other gods. And so he was set up as the god, right, the big one. And so that's why it was an act of rebellion. It's not just what we think, oh, we built a big tower so God didn't like it. Not quite. So a bigger version of this. Now, when you see the people groups go out all over the world, this kind of looks like a pyramid. And you can see this reflected in a lot of the architecture, like in Egypt, down in South America, and all this, they have all these pyramid shapes. And it starts with this called a ziggurat. Okay, this is what, I'll show you a clearer picture. This is Babylon today. The Bible says there's not going to be anything living in it. It's done, right? And in the walls where they map it out, nothing lives. There's nothing, it's just flat, barren. This is supposed to be 90 meters by 90 meters by 90 meters by like that. That's water, because all of the bricks used have been taken and used for other building projects down the road by many different people over the years. Not any of them are left. But we think it's going to be like this. We think that the tower of, that reaches to the heavens, but they wouldn't have the technology. This thing's got foundations that go out kilometers to hold it up. And we think it's going to be this giant tower that reaches to the heavens. They weren't trying to reach the heavens by its scale. They were trying to reach the heavens by its function. And this is what it was really like. So the ancient type documents tell that this was a giant ziggurat. This one's over 100 meters high. And that's what they built in the middle of the city. This was busted down by the Persians, and it's been rebuilt a number of times. Nebuchadnezzar rebuilt it. And this is what we kind of think might be. But this is actually an Islamic mosque.
Yeah.
Not far away. It's an Islamic mosque that they built in a spiral. But we sometimes think, oh, that's the Tower of Babel. Well, it's not. And it's a lot later than the other ones, history-wise. So now that we know that bit, let's go back to the word and say that this is what they were trying to do, was to trying to get to touch heaven with a spiritual tower. So it had a spiritual tower base. But it's funny that they did all this work. It was never completed, but it did all this work. And it says in verse 5, but the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. So they were trying to reach God, and they were trying to reach the spiritual realm, and yet the Lord still had to come down to see what they were looking at. So it didn't go too well. And so he comes down and says, you can imagine it, what are you doing, honestly? Because they're so far away in their understanding. But he said, well, if they're going to do this, I'm going to put some confusion in. Now, why is this relevant? Well, let's have a look. What would we say that the main problem with their hearts were?
They were hardened towards what God had called me to do.
Yeah? So we would call that what?
Divine.
Yeah? Rebellion.
Mm.
It was a rebellion of what God wanted to do, and it was a rebellion to set up another God in the top of their ziggurat tower. Okay, so that's what they used to do. So let's turn to, we probably don't need that now. Let's turn to, if you've got your Bibles, we're going to just turn to Isaiah chapter 55. Isaiah 55, and we'll be reading from verse 9. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than yours, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So in other words, the Lord's saying that whatever you're trying to do, I've got higher thinking about it. And you need to consult me if you want to know what that thinking is. And this started the whole thing for the Tower of Babel, but the Tower of Babylon is what it really is about. And we're going to look right down into Revelation in a minute of what it says about Babylon the Great and why it's relevant from Genesis all the way to Revelation, all the way to today. And so, in Psalms chapter 127, and you know this one, but it says, unless the Lord builds the house, reading from verse 1, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Watchman was to stop raiders and all the rest. Stays awake in vain. In vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like an arrow in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. And we will leave it there. But it says, unless the Lord builds the house. This is true for your own family, and this is true for a church, and this is true for a nation, unless the Lord builds the house. What do we know about our nation and many nations when we get a bad government? What we consider a government that isn't godly. They start to make weird decisions, and they don't build the house, or they don't build the government in a godly way. They build it in a we would probably call it an uneducated or foolish way, because it starts to cost everyone more money, time, effort, and all the rest of it, because it's not built the way God wants. You know, in the Old Testament, God was the king of the Jews. He was the king of the Israelites. And then all of a sudden they wanted a king, and he was saddened by it. They wanted a king. They wanted an earthly king that they could walk up to and say, hey, what do you got? And instead of seeking God out. And he gave them their request, but he said it's going to cost you taxes, money, effort, and all the rest, just because it wasn't me who built the house. Let's move on. So when we come down to Revelation chapter 17, okay, then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying, come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Now, every statement and every picture in Revelation represents a reality. That's how you read it. Don't try and just, how does it work? Well, every picture makes a reality. So the waters, there are the great sea of people. That's what it means. And you can read down further, it even tells you that. And so what would we say that the great harlot would be?
Someone that sells himself.
Remember, we're reading what it is, but everything represents a reality.
So it would be the nation that has done that.
Yeah. Well, it's the people, we read it, and I'll just read it again. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot. Now, the great harlot represents something. And then a harlot is like a prostitute. How would people prostitute themselves before our Creator God? They would build a Tower of Babel and they would worship another god. In other words, they would give their heart to someone else and worship that. So the great harlot is a rebellion, and it's a spiritual rebellion going way back. Okay. And remember, the Tower of Babel came after the flood. So it came after God's judgment on the earth, when the earth got so bad, but there's a whole thing to that, which we haven't got time for, to do with the Nephilim, to do with God's judgment on the enemy who tried to change even the DNA of people to a darker DNA of the enemy. But that's the whole thing, and that's part of the judgment of the ark. But here we're talking about, so after that, it says, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, who sits on many people, and who the kings of the earth committed fornication. So in other words, the kings of the earth entered into rebellion against God, and they did that by what? Worshipping who?
Probably gods. Yeah, Antichrist.
Yes, the Antichrist. But who's a pre-runner of the Antichrist? Look in the mirror. Who's the pre-runner of the Antichrist? Self.
Yeah.
Self. The Antichrist can't come until self reigns, right? Because he's the man of perdition. He's the one that's going to be judged, but he can't come until it's so bad that he can, like 100 years ago when people had more faith and worship God more, and the Antichrist comes and turns up, would they accept him? No, they'd say, that's not right, mate. You can go. But when everyone's full of self, and when everyone's worshipping self and in rebellion to God, that's when he comes. So, the kings of the earth committed fornication, inhabitants of the earth were made drunk, the wine of her fornication. So if he carried me away into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy. Okay, how would you what are the blasphemous names? Every false god. Remember, the pictures that we're looking at represent a reality. So every false god that isn't the one and true God. Okay? And the scarlet beast was, and they had 7 heads, 10 horns, talking about generations of. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned in gold and precious stones and pearls. Now, who knows what purple and scarlet is all about?
It's all fastballs. It's like a fellowship.
Yeah, so purple has majesty connected to it, and red has
Blood.
but prostitution connected to it. So we're talking about someone who has some kind of leadership position, kings of the earth, that have prostituted themselves to that. That's part of the picture. There's more meaning in it. We don't have time for all of that. But with gold, adorned with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So lots of earthly wealth. Having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the filthiness of her fornication. On her forehead was a name written, the mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, and the abomination of the earth. Now, we just read about the Tower of Babel, or Babylon, and that's where Babylon was, and was rebuilt many times. It was a ziggurat, just a really big one, and it had on the top the worship to a false god. The false god was supposed to be Marmaduke, which is one that got rid of all these other gods and is like a replacement for the one true God. The one I showed you that still exists a little bit today, which was south of that big one, they worshipped the moon god. And they had on its symbol a crescent moon. What do we know with a crescent moon?
The most of the people said.
That's right.
Egyptian flag, isn't it?
Well, the crescent moon part was part of that region, Mesopotamia, and that's where Islam came out of as well. So it's a whole lot of more history there. However, let's look at Babylon the Great. I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I was marveled with great amazement. Now you can read, we're not going to read the next bit, but you can read a lot more of the meaning of what that means coming in to the next bit, because the Bible explains itself, remember? If you want to know what it means, it explains itself. And, but we have the Tower of Babel is more than just a big tower that people got silly with and went to the sky with. It was a large temple where they tried to start to replace God. God comes down and says, "What are you doing?" And it says it was never finished. And because Babylon was rebuilt by Nebuchadnezzar and so forth, a couple of times by others, that same tower, God said, right, that's it. I'm bringing judgment, and there will be no stone left on another. And to this day, there isn't. To this day, you can look at, and they've drawn out the old walls of Babylon. Inside, nothing. Down the road, there's a village, bit away, but inside there's nothing left. And it just looks desolate, and it says it's going to have wild animals going through it. In fact, when they were filming it, there's a couple of wild animals ran through it. And I thought, well, that is so true for what the Bible said. And how does this relate to us today? It is the enemy's plan to bring rebellion into your heart and your mind, and it's the enemy's plan to get you to worship something other than the one true God. So God calls us to be tight with him and to get rid of all self. So self is the enemy because it can be corrupted very easily. So if someone started to tell you you were wonderful in a really weird way, in the sense of if someone gave you false things about yourself, you immediately probably reject them, right? And just say, oh, look, you should be Prime Minister of Australia. You go, no, that's not for me, that's not for me. But the more that people did it, the more you might go, maybe I could be the Prime Minister of Australia. And then it can, the deception, I'm not saying you couldn't be, depends what God's got, but I'm just saying that a deception can grow if it feeds self. But if self dies, remember, Satan can't kill a dead man. So if your self is dead, he can't corrupt you through it. All right, he can't attack you through it. And what does that look like? Does anyone know what it looks like to die to self?
Probably a joyful person.
Pardon?
Probably a joyful.
A joyful person, yep.
Will we just prioritize?
Yep, prioritize God.
Giving
person. They're not going to be rocked by the circumstance around them. You can easily see whether you died to self, because if the circumstances around you affect you greatly, like crazy, you've got some dying to do. I think we can all put our hands up to say that sometimes there's parts of us that could do with the dying part. And so we can ask God for that. And we can ask, Lord, show me where something's got to go. Because if something can go from your life, then you won't be caught in a deception. And really that's what the Tower of Babel was. It was a deception where they missed God. First, they disobeyed what he said. Secondly, they put up something that was to make their name great, so for self. And then they started to glorify another false god they made up. God was not pleased. So his response was not total destruction. It was to confuse their foolishness and make them spread out and do what he commanded them to do. But wouldn't it be easier just to say, yes, Lord, and grab your pack and go, rather than to stop and build something that's not supposed to be built? Because that's right. Remember, unless the Lord builds the house. So whatever you've got going on in your life, whatever it is, business, family, houses, homes, whatever, unless the Lord builds the house, future dreams, you labor in vain. And it says that all of our works will be examined before God. And I'm finishing on this. When we come before God, it's going to be refined by fire. What's left is what you get your reward. Your reward in heaven is built on not the same thing. So if you had a great business here and you owned 1,000 homes and you helped people and you did this and you did that, what would be left when it was burnt up at the end? Because you can't, none of us can take anything with us. So
anything that wasn't done from self, but done truly before the Lord.
Yeah.
condition your heart.
Whatever you did for God with a true heart would be your reward. And if none of it was motivated by that, then nothing's left. It says those will get into heaven, but just by the skin of their teeth kind of thing, just getting in the gate. But God says you can store up, in other words, there's room, store up your reward in heaven by your attitude, by what you do, by how you act towards others. And it is a currency which the world does not possess. And the currency is an attitude of love and care towards others that do not deserve it. If I give you love and care, but you deserve it, it's nice, but so what? But if someone's in your life and they don't deserve your care and love, but you give it anyway because you feel, God, I'm going to do it unto you. And you give love and care to that person. You store up gifts in heaven. You store up your reward in heaven because you've done it unto him. That's the difference. Let's pray.